Food is to our body what fuel is to an automobile. It contains biomacromolecules such as carbohydrates, proteins and lipids, as well as vitamins and minerals which enable our body to perform functions such as respiration, excretion, and so on. However, our body is incapable of using certain biomacromolecules such as carbohydrates and proteins in their original form. It therefore relies on the digestive system to break down food and convert the biomacromolecules into smaller, simple and absorbable molecules. Our digestive system comprises the alimentary canal or the gastrointestinal tract and the digestive glands. The alimentary canal, the long pathway through which food enters the body and solid wastes are digested, includes organs such as the mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and anus. If we observe the structure of an alimentary canal, we will see that the mouth, the anterior opening of the alimentary canal, leads to the oral cavity or buccal cavity, which contains the teeth and the tongue. Each tooth in the cavity is embedded in a socket of the jawbone, forming a type of attachment known as a thecodont. The hard, chewing surface of the tooth, made up of enamel, helps in chewing and breaking down of food. Interestingly, human beings develop two sets of teeth during their lifetime and are hence known as diphyodont. The permanent teeth in adults are of four types. Incisors represented by I, canines represented by C, premolars and molars represented by PM and M respectively. The arrangement of teeth in the upper and lower half of the jaw, in the I, C, PM, and M order, is expressed using the dental formula 2123 upon 2123. The tongue, the second member of the oral cavity, is a freely mobile muscle attached to the floor of the oral cavity by the frenulum. The upper surface of the tongue is covered with papillae, small projections arranged in a row, some of which have taste buds. The tongue helps push food from the oral cavity into the pharynx, a passageway for air and food. The pharynx opens into the windpipe or trachea and esophagus, a narrow tubular muscular organ. When food moves through the pharynx and approaches the esophageal entrance, a flap of elastic cartilage tissue called the epiglottis reflexively closes, thereby preventing the food from entering the windpipe. The esophagus conducts the food from the pharynx to the stomach. At the end of the esophagus lies the gastroesophageal sphincter, a one-way valve that allows food to enter the stomach but prevents it from regurgitating. The stomach, a J-shaped sac, is located in the upper left part of the abdominal cavity between the esophagus and the first part of the small intestine called the duodenum. Gastric acid inside the stomach digests the food we eat. The stomach is made of three major parts: a fundic region, cardiac portion, and a pyloric portion. At the end of the pyloric portion lies the pyloric sphincter, which regulates the flow of the churned food from the stomach into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. The duodenum is followed by the jejunum and ileum that make up the rest of the small intestine. While the duodenum is the short, U-shaped portion, the jejunum is the long, coiled portion. The ileum, on the other hand, is a highly coiled region that opens into the large intestine. The large intestine, which is the second last part of the alimentary canal, is divided into three regions, namely the cecum, colon, and rectum. The cecum, a small blind sac which hosts some symbiotic microorganisms, is not as developed in humans as in ruminants. Moreover, in humans, the cecum gives rise to a narrow finger-like tubular projection called the vermiform appendix, which is a vestigial or functionless organ. The cecum opens into the colon, which is divided into an ascending, a transverse, and a descending colon. The descending part of the colon leads to the rectum, a bag-like structure which stores undigested food as fecal matter till it can be passed out. The rectum leads to the last member of the alimentary canal, the anus, which digests the undigested food remains. The wall of the anus, as well as other organs of the alimentary canal, is made up of 4 layers of tissues, namely the serosa, muscularis, submucosa, and mucosa. The serosa, the outermost layer, is made up of a thin mesothelium along with some connective tissues. The serosa is followed by the muscularis, a muscle layer made up of a circular inner layer and a longitudinal outer layer of smooth muscle cells. Adjoining the muscularis is the submucosa, which is a soft connective tissue layer containing blood vessels, nerve endings, and lymphatic vessels. Did you know that in the duodenum, glands are also present in the submucosa? Finally, the mucosa, the innermost layer of the alimentary canal, lines the lumen of the alimentary canal. It is an important layer as the mucosal epithelium has goblet cells which help in lubrication by secreting mucus. In the stomach, mucosa forms gastric glands and irregular folds called rugae, whereas in the small intestine, mucosa forms villi, small finger-like projections. The mucosa also forms crypts, called the crypts of Lieber-Kuhn, between the bases of the villi. The borders of the villi have a brush-like appearance, as the cells lining the villi produce several microscopic projections called microvilli. Both villi and microvilli considerably increase the absorptive surface area of the small intestine. Villi also have a network of capillaries and a large lymph vessel called the lacteal. Interestingly, the tissues of the alimentary canal wall show modifications by way of thickness and so on. Apart from the alimentary canal, the digestive system also consists of the salivary glands, liver, and the pancreas. which are collectively known as the digestive glands. The salivary glands, located just outside the oral cavity, secrete salivary juices into the cavity. There are 3 pairs of salivary glands. The parotid gland, located in the cheek, the submaxillary or submandibular gland, found in the lower jaw, and the sublingual gland, located below the tongue. The liver, the largest gland of the body, is located in the abdominal cavity, just below the diaphragm. It has 2 hepatic lobes, which are covered by a thin connective tissue sheath called the Glisson's capsule. These lobules contain hepatic cells called hepatocytes, which are arranged in the form of cords. The bile secreted by the hepatic cells passes through the hepatic ducts and is stored and concentrated in the gallbladder. A duct emerging from the gallbladder, along with the hepatic duct from the liver, forms the common bile duct, whose main function is to conduct the bile stored in the gallbladder into the duodenum. Apart from the liver, the digestive glands also include the pancreas. Situated in the duodenum, the pancreas is a compound and elongated organ consisting of exocrine and endocrine parts. While the exocrine portion secretes an alkaline pancreatic juice containing enzymes, the endocrine portion secretes hormones such as insulin and glucagon. The pancreatic duct, which carries the pancreatic juices from the exocrine portion, joins the common bile duct, and both of them open into the duodenum as the hepatopancreatic duct, which is guarded by the sphincter of Oddi. Together, the organs of the alimentary canal and the associated glands digest the food we eat and digest the undigested food. Every day, our body performs several important functions such as respiration, digestion, excretion, to name a few. Of these processes, digestion is a vital one, as it provides energy to the body by converting complex food into smaller, simpler and absorbable molecules. The digestion process begins the moment we put food into the oral cavity through our mouth. The teeth, present in the oral cavity, masticate the food, while the tongue mixes it with saliva, which is rich in electrolytes such as sodium, potassium, chloride, and bicarbonate ions, and various enzymes such as salivary amylase and lysozyme. Each of the salivary components has its own function. For instance, the salivary amylase, a carbohydrate-splitting enzyme, initiates the process of digestion in the oral cavity by hydrolyzing nearly 30% of food starch into a disaccharide or simple sugar called maltose. Whereas lysozyme acts as an antibacterial agent and kills microbes present in food substances, thereby preventing infections. Mucus, on the other hand, lubricates the food and helps the masticated food particles stick together to form a bolus. Thereafter, the bolus passes through the pharynx and then into the esophagus by the process of swallowing or deglutition. Once the bolus enters the esophagus, a series of wave-like muscular contractions known as peristalsis pushes it down the esophagus and towards the gastroesophageal sphincter, a one-way valve that conducts the bolus from the esophagus into the stomach. The bolus remains in the stomach for nearly 4 to 5 hours, where it mixes with the gastric juices secreted by the gastric glands. These glands are stimulated by the gastrin hormone and inhibited by the enterogastrin hormone, and consist of mainly 3 types of cells: mucous neck cells, which secrete mucus; peptic or chief cells, which secrete the proenzyme pepsinogen; and parietal or oxyntic cells, which secrete hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor, a type of microprotein that absorbs vitamin B complex. The churning of the stomach walls mixes these gastric gland secretions with the bolus, forming a pulp-like substance called chyme. During the process of churning, a highly concentrated hydrochloric acid, secreted by the gastric glands, converts the proenzyme pepsinogen, present in the chyme, into an active proteolytic enzyme called pepsin. Interestingly, in spite of the presence of the hydrochloric acid in the lumen of the stomach's mucosal epithelium remains relatively unscathed, as the mucus and bicarbonates in the gastric juices lubricate and protect it from excoriation or wear off. The chyme from the stomach passes through the pyloric sphincter and enters the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. Here, the movements generated by the muscularis layer of the duodenum causes the chyme to mix with pancreatic juice and bile, the secretions of the hepatopancreatic gland. These secretions contain different enzymes and pigments that help in the further breakdown of food molecules. Bile, for example, contains bile pigments such as bilirubin and biliverdin, bile salts, cholesterol, and phospholipids. On the other hand, pancreatic juice consists of inactive enzymes such as trypsinogen, chymotrypsinogen, procarboxypeptidases, amylases, lipases, and nucleases. These inactive enzymes are activated by trypsin and chymotrypsin, which are produced when enterokinase, an enzyme secreted by the intestinal mucosa, acts on inactive trypsinogen to form active trypsin and also converts inactive chymotrypsinogen into active chymotrypsin. The bile and pancreatic secretions now start converting complex molecules of the chyme into simpler forms. The proteolytic enzymes trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase, for instance, act upon the proteins, proteoses, and peptones and convert them into smaller peptides. Similarly, the pancreatic amylase hydrolyze the carbohydrates into simple sugars or disaccharides. On the other hand, enzymes such as lipases break down fats into diglycerides and monoglycerides with the help of bile, whereas nucleases acts on nucleic acids and forms nucleotides and nucleosides. In the final steps of digestion, the end products synthesized by the action of bile and pancreatic juice are further converted into absorbable molecules by intestinal juice or succus entericus that's secreted by the walls of the intestine. This juice consists of mucus secreted by the goblet cells in the small intestine's mucosal epithelium and secretions of the brush border cells of the mucosa, and contains several enzymes such as disaccharadases, dipeptidases, lipases, and nucleosidases. The simple substances produced in the duodenum are absorbed in the jejunum and the ileum regions of the small intestine. On the other hand, the undigested and unabsorbed substances, called feces, enter the cecum region of the large intestine through the ileocecal valve. The feces then travel through the colon, which absorbs water, minerals and certain drugs in the feces. The colon also secretes mucus, which adheres the undigested waste particles together and also lubricates them for easy passage. The fecal matter enters the rectum, where it is temporarily stored till defecation. Interestingly, for proper coordination of different parts of the gastrointestinal tract, its activities are under hormonal and neural control. For instance, local hormones produced by the gastric and intestinal mucosa manage the secretion of digestive juices. On the other hand, the sight, smell or presence of food in the oral cavity leads to saliva secretion. Similarly, gastric and intestinal secretions such as pepsin and hydrochloric acid are also stimulated by neural signals. Neural mechanisms can also moderate the muscular activities of different parts of the alimentary canal, both local and through the central nervous system. Thus, different parts of the alimentary canal and digestive glands help us to digest the food we eat. Absorption of food is a crucial event in the digestion process. After complex food has been broken down into smaller components, it needs to be absorbed into the blood and lymph so that it can be transported throughout the body. Although absorption takes place in different parts of the alimentary canal, such as the mouth, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine, maximum absorption occurs in the small intestine. The villi on the intestinal wall increase the surface area of the small intestine and help to efficiently absorb the digested nutrients such as glucose, fructose, amino acids, and electrolytes. These nutrients from the food pass through the intestinal mucosa into the bloodstream and are distributed throughout the body. Absorption takes place in the intestinal mucosa through passive transport and active transport. In passive transport, there is no expenditure of energy. There are three types of passive transport: simple diffusion, facilitated transport, and osmosis that assist in absorption. Small amounts of glucose, amino acids, and electrolytes such as chloride ions are generally absorbed from a higher to a lower medium by simple diffusion, whereas fructose and some amino acids are absorbed down a concentration gradient with the help of a specific carrier protein through facilitated diffusion. On the other hand, transport of water takes place from a dilute to a concentrated medium through osmosis. Absorption also takes place from a lower to a higher medium through active transport, which is much quicker and requires energy. Nutrients such as sodium ions, glucose, galactose, and amino acids are transported actively. Unlike carbohydrates and proteins, fats are not absorbed through the intestinal villi. Fatty acids and glycerol are insoluble in water and therefore cannot be absorbed by the intestinal cells directly. They are first acted upon by bile salts to form small spherical droplets called micelles, which can easily move through the intestinal mucosa. As micelles enter the intestinal mucosa, they are coated with protein to form small fat globules called the chylomicrons, which are transported into the lymph vessels called lacteals in the villi. These lymph vessels ultimately release the absorbed substances into the bloodstream. Besides the small intestine, other parts of the digestive system also play a role in the absorption process. For example, certain drugs are placed in the mouth under the tongue so that they can be absorbed directly into the blood capillaries. The stomach wall directly absorbs certain foods, including simple sugars and alcohol, and they do not remain in the stomach. While water, some minerals such as potassium and sodium, and drugs are absorbed in the large intestine. These absorbed nutrients are transported to different tissues of the body through the blood vessels, and this process is called assimilation. However, the digestive wastes pass through the large intestine, where water is absorbed and waste is solidified into feces. The fecal matter moves towards the rectum due to peristaltic waves in the walls of the colon, which finally eliminates the waste through the anus. If the digestive system does not function as smoothly as it should, it results in different types of disorders. Inflammation of the intestinal tract takes place when there are bacterial or viral infections. Parasitic infections are caused by tapeworms, roundworms, hookworms, pinworms, and others that usually infect the intestine. Indigestion takes place when food is not properly digested and one experiences a feeling of fullness, pain, or heartburn. This usually takes place due to inadequate enzyme secretion, anxiety, food poisoning, overeating, and spicy food. Constipation is another condition of the digestive system in which an individual has uncomfortable or infrequent bowel movements. Vomiting causes forceful contraction of the stomach and ejection of the stomach contents through the mouth. This is preceded by a feeling of nausea. Medical conditions such as jaundice result from excess of bilirubin or bile pigments in the tissues and body fluids. It affects the liver and causes the skin and the whites of the eyes to turn yellow. Diarrhea is another condition in which there is an increase in the liquidity of fecal discharge and bowel movements. It occurs when enough water is not removed from the stool, making the stool loose and poorly formed. Thus we have seen that absorption and assimilation of food is essential, and disorders in the digestive process can lead to severe complications.